Okay, Heidi Hall, can I ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're running?
Be happy to. I grew up in the Bay Area, and to a household I like to say is regular middle class. We grew up with enough, nothing extra special. I don't come from money. I don't come from political networks, and I was able to get a really great education. And part of that is because I loved school. I was a hard worker, and there were really great low interest federal loans at the time. So I went on to get a master's in international relations from Columbia University, a bachelor's in international relations from Pomona College, and another master's in public policy from Rutgers. And I was able to pay back my loans completely, and that was a win-win. So I'm a big public education advocate. I came up to Grass Valley with my two children. I have a 19-year-old who's in community college up here and a 23-year-old. He's a young veteran, and he's working for minimum wage in another state right now and struggling to survive. So I feel like I have a really great understanding of what it's like to be a working person, part of a working family up in a rural area. I'm running because I have an abiding interest in politics, and especially in politics that moves things forward. And I've been very dismayed by the Congress that we've had the last few years. This last year was the most unproductive Congress in history, and in part that's because of a small group of extremists who are blocking legislation and blocking movement forward. Unfortunately, our representative is part of the bloc that has voted no on many, many bills that would benefit our rural area. And so I decided to get involved. I wanted to provide a choice to people up here, someone who would actually work very hard for our rural issues rather than for ideological reasons.
Okay. I have a series of 3 questions that I'm going to ask you. They're going to be the same 3 questions that I asked to each candidate. First off, where do you stand on the topic of surface water storage? Do you support dam removal efforts in Northern California? What about surface water storage efforts like the Sites Reservoir, which has recently been put forward by Doug LaMalfa? Finally, how do you balance the needs of California farmers against the needs of river ecosystems in an era of drought?
Okay, that's a lot of information right there. So let me just say that I work right now for the Department of Water Resources, and I've worked for the Environmental Protection Agency and resource management issues all my life. So I'm very familiar with water issues in this state. They're complicated. They have not been addressed fully yet, and so now that we're in a drought, we're seeing what happens when they haven't been addressed well, which is that the fights start over the water. So I want to start by saying the issues are complex. We need to be sitting down at the table with farmers from the Central Valley and the northern state, with cities from all parts of the state, southern and northern California, and with businesses. We can't be fighting each other. I'd say right off the start that this theme of farmers versus fish is false right from the get-go. There's a certain amount of water that needs to be in the rivers for the ecosystem, and that includes the fishing industry, but it's for a lot of other reasons. Really, then we have the issue of northern farmers who really by all rights should be getting the water they need because this is where most of the water is. And then we have Central Valley farmers, and many of those are planting in the desert where water is not available at all unless we ship it down there. And those farmers need to be brought to the table and need to be willing to make some sacrifices as well. And we haven't asked that because they're a powerful political group. And then we have the Southern California cities issues, and they need to be part of the conversation as well. So when it comes to how we solve this problem, one of my friends has a saying that I love, which is pouring cement won't make it rain. And that's because California has over-allocated the water we already have. We've promised to farmers and cities and the rivers more water than we usually get every year. So we're going to be constantly in this fight that really is not bringing us together, but is rather tearing us apart and putting us against each other in ways we shouldn't. So I'm doing a lot of reading from the experts on what they think the solutions are. And they're going to have to be regional and local. We're sort of the days of these massive water projects, big tunnels like the twin tunnels that are proposed. Those are not the solutions anymore. That's not going to help us get where we need. The coastal areas need to be looking at desalinization. The Central Valley needs to be looking at much more conservation. And we up here in the north need to be looking at some surface storage and also groundwater storage and protection. We've got farmers now, some who may be pulling out more than their allocation and selling it, and I don't think that's right. We need to be taking care of our district and making sure that water is equitably distributed. So when it comes to dams, I think this, the bill that's been put forward for Sites Reservoir really doesn't do much but simply speed along a study. It's not going to create jobs. It's not going to have to make sure the dam is built. And as far as dams go, I understand that that's probably the best location for one. So I'm not opposed to it. I do want it to be part of a bigger picture of water storage issues and water conservation issues, so that we're not just looking at more and more surface storage, because that's not going to be the answer. With regard to the dam removals that they're talking about up north, there's an accord. There are 2 accords up there now over the Klamath River. Both of those accords have been agreed to by the state of California, the state of Oregon, all of the counties, the fishing groups, the tribal groups, and the environmental groups up there. This is a long time coming, and they're very important accords. I would, as a federal person, absolutely not want to go in there and mess with the agreements that they've hammered out, which include bringing down those dams. The agreements also include $40 million in development money and $5 million in transition money. So it's going to bring much needed jobs and resources to those counties that are going to be having to adjust to this.
The new Common Core curriculum has been the subject of a lot of local criticism, and a recent town hall meeting was staged by Common Core opponents. Do you support the new standards, or do you have other ideas for improving the American educational system?
I'm really sorry that Common Core has become such a flashpoint, because it did at one point seem to be a solution to our declining education that looked great, and still in many ways does. It was actually a bipartisan group of people who came up with these accords. They looked at what was happening all over the world. They talked to experts, and much of what they've come up with was actually came back to looking at our system 20 or 30 years ago when it was better, and taking us back to higher standards for reading and writing, etc. So the idea of Common Core standards, so we have some commonality among the states, and that we're asking a little bit more of our students and our teachers, is one that I support. This doesn't impose a curriculum on the local areas. The local areas are still able to create their own curriculum. It simply sets some standards that will help our students, when they come out of high school, have similar skills across the states and make them more employable. And I absolutely support that. I think there are some problems with Common Core, most importantly the testing issue. I think they've kind of got that wrong, and they're going to need to go back and fix that. But I'm really sorry that this has become a political flashpoint, because it isn't at all imposing federal control over local agencies and requiring curriculum and a lot of things that people are afraid of that I wouldn't want to see happen either.
Okay, for everybody out there on YouTube, we've had some technical difficulties. The iPhone that we were using to make this recording stopped recording, so we have gotten another phone and we are starting another video, and that is why we have this gap. So, picking up where we left off, Heidi Hall, do you support the Jefferson statehood movement? Why or why not?
Okay, so as I was saying, I take the state of Jefferson movement very seriously. I've been traveling throughout this district, which is all are part of 11 counties, including the northernmost counties where the statehood movement is strongest. And I take it seriously because it's a very clear expression of frustration that people have who live in those counties, especially in the far north. Now, what their frustration is around are the same issues that our rural area and other rural areas in the state and in the country suffer from. We have higher unemployment, we have higher poverty, we have very little business that's growing, or we don't have sort of a key economic sector that's bringing people back to prosperity as the recession fades. And people are frustrated. And to my mind, what's going on there is that they've had very minimal representation at the state and federal level. Our representation for the last 30 years has been basically based on not taking a lot of action, not interfering with business, which means really not doing much to bring resources back to the region, not advocating for the region's needs. And as a rural region, we have far more needs than the urban areas. We need help with jobs. We need help with to bring in more small businesses, to help our small businesses grow. We have just incredible need for things like broadband, which I would love to talk about more. It's one of my main issues right now. We have a need to help our smaller farmers, not just our big farmers. And all of these will take some leadership, potentially some grant funding, and some tax breaks, things that rural areas desperately need, especially up in the north. So to my mind, the idea of breaking off and creating another state isn't going to answer the challenges that the statehood movement is trying to meet. They're going to end up with higher costs, less help, and they're going to be stranding the poorer people in one area without the federal help that they really actually need, even though they don't feel like they want it. So my answer to that is they need to have better representation at both the state and the federal levels. They need people who will go to Washington and in Sacramento, say we have particular needs in the rural areas, and we need to put some attention there.
Ms. Hall, I like to close out all of my interviews by asking if there's something that I missed or should have asked about and didn't give you a chance to discuss. If you would like to, please take 60 to 90 seconds to address a topic of your choosing.
Okay, I'm going to try to talk about two really quickly. One is obviously economy. We need to get jobs back in this area. We're really floundering. I think the biggest obstacle to that is the lack of broadband, and I've been looking into why we don't have it, and I'm going to be working very hard on making that happen. The other issue is our forests. We've had mismanaged forests for 30 years here. We are going to be the location of the next rim fire if we don't deal with it, and that will be a high priority for me in Congress as well.